So yeah, I would like to present you Jeff Lopez, the global Indian. He forgot his US roots, I believe. Okay. And sorry for one change, because February we were going to conduct this conference and somehow his mom wasn't well and he had to go back. That wise, he also feels Indian, right? Looks like an Indian. Your mom isn't good and you're just running away. Yeah? Okay, over to you.
Yeah, being in this climate here, I was born and grew up in Michigan, in the United States, in the Midwest, and I had to go back in early January to deal with some family stuff, and found myself driving through a blizzard in northern Michigan. Sorry, yeah, I'm doing two-fisted presenting today, so if the mic goes away from my mouth, just give me the secret signal, and we'll do that. So yeah, I went from Pune in December to driving through a blizzard in Michigan back to Pune, where it was, I think when I got here last week, it was 105 or something like that. So, and you really do not want to hear the story of why I know my dosha levels. Of why I had to learn about that. So I will tell you a much more interesting story today, I hope. So at the end of 2017, I traveled to Kanyakumari so I could be present there on the 125th anniversary of when Swami Vivekananda swam out to what now is known as Vivekananda Rock. And I wanted to be there on that day because of what emerged from that time. He had spent about 2 to 3 years as an itinerant monk, traveling all throughout India from the far north, and then at the end of 1892, found himself at Kanyakumari, and swam out to that rock with the sharks and the churning water, and spent 3 days in meditation upon that rock. And it was at that time that he hatched his vision for what he would spend the rest of his life committed to. And without any big upfront plan, he left Vivekananda Rock, and 9 months later found himself in Chicago, Illinois, in the United States, only about 2 hours away from the place I was born and grew up. And again, without any big upfront plan, he found himself standing in front of thousands of people at the very first Congress of World Religions that was happening as part of the Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1892. And again, not really knowing what he was going to say, not having a big plan of what he was going to say in front of it, he stood up in front of all those people and just uttered the words, "Sisters and brothers of America." And just the force of who he was being, just after those few words, caused the thousands of people to rise and give him a standing ovation that lasted 2.5 minutes. So about that time, and you'll have to apologize, I don't have a monitor, so I'm going to have to turn my back a bit to read this to you. He would. This is the kind of things he would say to the people in the United States, and then when he came back to India. Let us take our stand on the one central truth: the spirit of man, the immortal, birthless, all-pervading soul of man, before whose majesty the universe is as a drop. Every man or woman is such a spirit, evoluted or involuted. The infinite power of that spirit brought to bear upon matter evolves material development. Made to act upon thought evolves intellectually, and made to act upon itself makes of a man a god. First, let us be gods, and then help others to be gods. Be and make, let this be our motto. Say not a man is a sinner, tell him he is a god. Now skip ahead about 100 years, and a bunch of guys got together in Utah in 2001 and wrote what we now know to be the Manifesto for Agile Software Development, which really codified the whole movement to transform how we approach work that has brought us all here today. And as that group of people wrote this down. They started out saying, we're uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. They aren't creating a whole bunch of grand theories of how people are supposed to work. They didn't come out with a big design. They said, we're going to start by doing things and help others doing things. And from our activity in that, we've discovered that we value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So right from the beginning, who we are being is really important. We are going to be people that value individuals and value each other and the interactions between us over following a rigid process or trying to get people to use certain tools. And from that, we've also come to value working stuff, working software over comprehensive documentation, which means as we engage in this work, we are going to value making things over understanding how we're going to make things. So right from the get-go, being and making, right in the beginning of the Agile Manifesto. Vivekananda said, my method of work is to construct, to make things, not to pull things down. All right, now who is this guy standing in front of you that just tied Swami Vivekananda to the Agile Manifesto? So I've been an Agile practitioner for just about 12 years now. I started out as a team on as a business analyst, eventually became a Scrum Master, then worked as a product owner for a while, and then started working as an Agile coach, which is work I've been engaged for almost 9 years now. For a few years, I traveled all throughout the United States, Agile coaching at a number of different companies. And then just over 5 years ago, it was actually April 1st, 2014, I started coaching in India for the first time. And I've come back here quite frequently to do that work in the last 5 years. Now, I'm an American. As I said, I was born and grew up in Michigan. There's my home in Tukwila, Washington, right outside Seattle. But the story of how this presentation came about actually started in Berlin, Germany, at the end of 2015. And I traveled there to go to a gathering of people at the time who were really interested in distributed Agile development, which a whole 4 years ago was still kind of a cutting edge thing. The collaboration tools were just starting to become viable enough that we could actually work at a distance, where before we had to be strictly co-located. And so a bunch of people and I traveled to Berlin and held a weekend of open space just to explore this topic. And I was sitting in that group, and we were and the topic of this open space topic was how to work among different countries and different cultures. And so we're having an open space session and talking about that. And one of the people there said, you know, I just love working with people in India, but they're so hierarchical. Okay? And that didn't sit right with me. And it's really, when you explore this theme of having too hierarchical, and sure enough, you can explore, you find articles saying, Agile will not work in India, right? But I knew that felt internally not to be true. But and then you can find that a lot of people have this story about their own cultures. Here's somebody wrote an article about 5 crazy reasons why Agile won't work in Germany. Somebody else wrote saying Scrum does not work in Asia. He's referring to Southeast Asia when he's writing it, right? And somebody read that article about why Scrum doesn't work in Asia, and he said, wow, you could rewrite that whole thing for South America too. And somebody says, well, wait a minute, Scrum will work in Argentina. And the guy says, well, you know what, I haven't been to Argentina, but I know it won't work in Colombia, Peru, Uruguay, Ecuador, and Mexico, and a whole lot of other places. And so what's the story people have about why Agile won't work in my culture? It's always hierarchy. The guy who says it won't work in India says people won't question their boss. The guy who says won't work in Germany says hierarchy is too strong for Agile to be fully utilized in Germany. This guy says everything, and the guy who writes about Asia says everything in life should have hierarchy, and that's why Agile won't work in our culture. So this is, you see, it's a current theme, and it's kind of a cop-out. That shows a lack, I don't really want to engage with the people there. I just make a story up about them that is too hierarchical and Agile will not work for you. But I knew from my experience working here that that wasn't true. I spent about a year coaching at what is now a former unit of Cisco in Bangalore, and it was the most amazingly successful Agile engagement I've ever been in. Teams went from having cycle times of 2 years or never being able to deliver, and customers ready to fire them, to we were doing cycle times of about a month within 6 months, and customers couldn't spend money fast enough on this organization when we got in there. But I was searching for what made that different here. What was the flavor that was present that made this successful compared to other struggles, for instance, struggles I'd had in very old-fashioned industrial organizations in the United States. And I found the answer to that, not in the big tech centers, but by going and traveling throughout India. And especially experiences I've had in travels. I've gone to a holy mountain called Arunachala, which is in the city of Tiruvannamalai in Tamil Nadu. A lot of you might know that better as the location of the ashram of Ramana Maharshi. That is where Ramana Maharshi's ashram is located. But that mountain, which is called Arunachala, is a holy mountain. It's not, devotees of that place feel that the mountain just isn't symbolic of Shiva, the mountain is Shiva. And so once a month, on every full moon, about 100,000 people, in fact, I think it's probably happening tonight, because I think today is the full moon, about 100,000 people will be at this place walking the 8.5 kilometers around the mountain. That's a spiritual practice. So I started going there, and I actually started getting involved with feeding pilgrims that came to this place. Because those 100,000 people that show up there generally show up with nothing but the clothes on their back and sleep on the ground outside of temples, knowing that they'll be taken care of. So I would stay with a Swami that lived on the north side of the mountain, along what's known as the Garivalam Road, and we would stay up all night and cook for people. And the first time I did this, it was just an amazing experience. And this is what keyed me into why agility was actually working so well there. So we're cooking all night, and the sun is coming up, and it's time to feed people. And I have no idea how this is going to work, right? How are you going to feed? Because out on the road, I'm looking out on the road, and there's like a river of people out on the road. The people are so thick. And if we start saying breakfast is served, it's a mob that's going to follow. So Swami said, let's just follow my directions on this. And so 4 of us picked up the cauldron of Pungal, that one right there. And just the thing probably weighed 75 or 100 pounds. And we brought it out and set it on the sidewalk. And literally within 10 seconds of sitting that cauldron down on the sidewalk, there was a single file line as far as I could see. It was like the line just emerged from the river of people and just was there. Nobody told anybody where to go. There were no ropes. There were no signs. There were no policemen keeping people in charge. It just emerged. And then we began to feed people, and it was from my hand to their hand, right? We fed them pungal, we fed them chana, we fed them halva. I wanted to make the chana, so Swamiji said, okay, you feed it to people. And there I am. And for over an hour, it was my hand to their hand, right? My friend Suresh watched me and said, I've probably fed over 3,000 people in an hour, right? Just handing it to them. And when the food was gone, I was like, what's going to happen while the food was gone? When the food was gone, the line just merged back into the river and continued up because they knew it would be fed later. It was the most amazing experience of self-organization I had ever had up to that point, and still have up to that point. And that's how I learned what a great fertile ground India was for agility. This amazing experience to inspect and adapt in the moment, and just to adapt, and without any organization, this order kind of emerging to go to a goal, and then when the goal was done, just to move on. And that's when I discovered that's what I felt in India, this amazing ability, comfort with chaos and ambiguity, and to be able to inspect and adapt in the moment. So why I think this nation is such a great fertile ground for agility is, first of all, I relate to people, and people get this. Most people I say this is the zest for learning here. The zest for learning is much higher in India than I experience in other parts of the world. But there's also this great comfort with chaos and ambiguity at scale. Okay, right? No scaling framework being applied in that picture. So let's dig underneath this a little bit. That's Christopher Alexander. And Christopher Alexander is a physical architect of physical buildings and towns and cities. But he's most well known for inventing the concept of patterns and design patterns, which we use a lot. We've heard it a lot of times talking in other presentations today, the concept of patterns. He created that. He wrote a book called A Pattern Language that really introduced this idea. And now he was applying it to physical buildings and physical architecture and building cities. And he said at the core of this is the idea that people should design for themselves their own houses, streets, and communities. And it comes simply from the observation that most wonderful places in the world were not made by architects, but made by people. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Working stuff over big upfront designs. And Jeff Sutherland actually he talks about the Scrum framework as a pattern language for hyperproductivity. So this is the Scrum Plop website, which is the official repository for the patterns that now make up what we know as the Scrum framework. But Alexander, as he worked with patterns, began to discover patterns were not enough. Right? There's actually a structure to how you use these patterns that's extremely important. So in the early 2000s, he published a series of 4 books called The Nature of Order. And if I could sum up those 4 big books into a small description, he said that there are ways of expressing these patterns and ways of using patterns in skillful ways that actually generate more life in the world. They generate value in the way you express things. It's not just the patterns themselves. Living structure or living order depends on features which make a close connection to the human self. Our analytical thinking selves and our vulnerable emotional personalities in human beings are coterminous and must be harnessed at one and the same time if we are ever to really make sense of what's around us and being able to create a living world. This is a statement from an academic, right? This isn't a statement from a spiritual teacher. But he says a spiritual, emotional, and personal basis must underlie every act of building and making. You can't just do an academic or an intellectual design. You have to bring spiritual, emotional, and personal basis to every act of building. Now, here's something I found fascinating. So he introduced in the series of 4 books what he felt were 15 fundamental properties of creating life in a structure. And the number 1 property is levels of scale. Right? Scale exists, and scale isn't any big, difficult concept. Scale is very natural. It exists in life everywhere. Levels of scale exist along with a scaling hierarchy, repeating components of the same size in a similar shape define one scale. Levels of scale has to be spaced closely enough in size for coherence, but not too close to blur the distinction between nearby scales. So scaling is a very natural thing. And Jeff Sutherland, when he talks about how he arrived at what now is now known as Scrum at scale, traces back not to his experience as a technology expert, but when he was a medical school professor. Jeff Sutherland has an interesting history. He was a graduate of the United States Military Academy. He was a fighter pilot in Vietnam, and then decided he wanted to become a doctor, and the military sent him through medical school, and he became a medical researcher and was doing a lot of work on cell biology, funded by the National Institute of Health. And that's when it was his work as a medical researcher where he started generating the ideas for Scrum. He actually got hired out of his medical program by a bank to implement Scrum for the first time. And so he designed Scrum at scale to function like a biological organism from a single cell, something that's very natural. And he says that to scale an organization effectively, you have to have what he calls a scale-free architecture. Now, I find that a little bit of an awkward phrase because it sounds like you're free of scaling. What it really means is you must be able to scale freely. That people and teams of teams must be able to interact with each other freely and self-organize freely, even at a massive scale. And the second you try to start adding a bunch of rules, adding a bunch of processes and ways that people have to behave in that, if they can't scale freely, you'll introduce waste into the system and you won't get linear scalability, which is absolutely possible, he believes, if you're practicing Scrum widely in an organization, the whole organization can achieve linear scalability, doing 20, 50, 100 times the work that they were doing, output that they were doing before. And he says these things exist in biology. And so they also exist among humans until we start putting a bunch of rules around them. So again, why is India the great fertile ground for agility? There's the zest for learning, which is the seeking out of value. And the comfort with chaos and ambiguity, which is this ability to scale freely. This blew me away when I found this. I was searching through his, and I found he wrote this. I'm not given much to talking about plans. I prefer to do and show and then talk about my plans, which to me sums up the Scrum framework in 2 sentences, right? We're not gonna make big upfront plans. We're gonna do something, and then we're gonna show it to people, and then we'll talk about it. This is what we do, and this was just a natural way of working. So, Vivekananda, and you can see the impact that he had all over the nation. Right? Gandhi, Nehru, Tagore said that he actually laid a lot of the foundation for what became modern India by just what he did when he came back from the United States and started teaching and traveling and building in India. All right. So, what's before us? What do I propose your agenda should be? First of all, as people who were born here, in this time, in this place, in knowing what you know about agility, you must build a life. To use what you've learned in being here to extend your own life to the capacity and generate new realms of value within life itself. It is not enough to build a career or to build wealth or to add to your long list of certifications. You must build a life, your life. And As great agilists, inside of building that life, you must have a backlog for yourself that you're working towards. Next, as you are building a life, you must add people. Now, you could look at that picture and deduce very easily that India is a country where it's very easy to add a lot of people. Don't set your bar that low, right? What are you doing to impact all those people, and then the people in the whole region, or in the whole country, and eventually the whole world? That's what you must aspire to. So when you see this phrase, individuals and interactions over processes and tools, treat it as an invitation, not as a stale value that sits on a wall on a poster. This is an invitation to live a life and to add people. Life is short, but the soul is immortal and eternal, and one thing being certain, death. Let's take up a great ideal and give up our whole life to it. Now, Vivekananda lived his life as a founder of a monastic order, so he lived in the space where he could devote his whole life. That might be a little extreme for a lot of people to take something like that, but this is what he's saying there. What I would propose to you is, in everything you do as you're building a life, choose what you focus on, and choose to make things that generate more life and more value for the world. Don't just go do a job as a Scrum Master. Don't be content with just a nice job on an Agile team. Always choose something where you're building value. Christopher Alexander says, whenever we take on an act of work, we have the opportunity to make the world more alive or less alive, more harmonious or less harmonious in everything you do. Finally, B.K.S. Iyengar, who was a great resident of Pune, he actually became a great yogi, right, through practice. He was very sick as a young kid, and he became who he was through constant practice. And so he would say change is always going to lead to disappointment if it's not sustained. So change is a process you always engage in. It's not part of a transformation program where you bring a bunch of consultants in. Transformation is sustained change, and it is achieved through practice. Now, you may have seen in an early slide, I'm a musician. I play music from I play Sufi music from Turkey. But one of my teachers is a man named Victor Wooten. Do we have any electric bass players in the room? No bass players here. So a lot of people know Victor as probably the greatest electric bass player ever to touch the instrument. But I know him better as a teacher. And he says he always teaches, his first teaching as a musician is you never lose the groove in order to find a right note. If I translate that into Agile terms, we never let an impediment get in the way of delivering value. When impediments rise, they're just something interesting to happen. Maybe they'll actually help us create better stuff. So never let anything get in the way of delivering. There's no bureaucracy that's getting in the way of those seeking out their value. No set of rules. It's something that just happens. So, to bring it together, live a life. Always have a backlog. Add people. Always choose something to make of value. And always improve iteratively. Now, we are in Pune, the great cultural capital of this region, the center for automotive manufacturing in this country, the great academic center for this country, this international reputation, the great center during the path to independence, the great center for progress in social change that influenced the independence, and unlike another big city in Karnataka that maybe had a kind of a similar path, a place that is actually very sustainable to live. Use that. As great agilists in Pune, build your own backlog of what you want the city to, how you want the city to emerge. Do not wait for another multinational to build a big tech center. Build your own backlog for the future you want to create. So one of the things that so what's on your backlog as a group, Pune? All right. So, just to leave you here, the thing that really inspired me to take up this journey, and I keep coming back to India as long as they invite me, was something I saw whenever I go to Delhi. I go to the Rajghat, and there used to be this plaque here, and the plaque is taken away. But when I saw this plaque for the first time 4 years ago, it really inspired me. This is the thing that caused me to come back here. Gandhi said, "I'd like to see India free and strong, so she may offer herself as a willing and pure sacrifice to the betterment of the world." The individual being pure sacrifices himself for the family, the latter for the village for the district for the province for the nation, and the nation for all. I want Kudai Raj, which is the same thing as the kingdom of God on earth. The establishment of such a Rajya would not only mean welfare for the whole Indian people, but welfare for the whole world. So I hope I introduced you to a few things that you can take and practice and put to work in your own life, with your colleagues, with your organization, and with your community, so that together you can become what Gandhiji would call a force more powerful for the world. Thank you for your attention today. It's been great to be with you.
Yeah. I would like to invite Vikram to facilitate Jeff, please. Yeah. Until now, I have seen mostly people just thinking about Western world when agility comes into picture. This is the first time I heard from Jeff. Agility is always there in India. Yeah, thank you. Would like to say something? Yeah? Would like to say something?
No, I just told him this was really, really awesome. I mean, so I came actually somewhere in the afternoon, and I thought maybe should I grab a cup of coffee or something to keep me awake here. But I can tell you this was really an eye-opener for me. And I've never seen somebody comparing Vivekananda to Agile. That was really the first one. So thank you very much.